number 6, Georgia, and number 5, Florida State. Georgia beats Florida State 63-3. 63-3. I understand the entire situation. I get it. I know Florida State had a lot of guys opt out. I know. I understand. 63-3 could be a product of a lot of different contributing factors. You've got a team like Florida State. Guys are opting out. They're pretty dejected, not extremely motivated, right? However, although I think it'd be the opposite. I would have thought Florida State would have showed up with a chip on their shoulder and been pissed off. And then you got a team like Georgia who comes off of a loss, loses their chance to compete for a national championship, has a couple of guys opt out, including their best offensive player and first round pick, Brock Bowers at tight end. But a lot of their other guys on offense were around to contribute, and they were playing with maybe something to prove, to show that they wanted or needed to be in the top 4. Not entirely sure. There's a lot of different contributing factors that could have led to 63-3 between Georgia and Florida State. One of the excuses I'm not going to hear about Florida State getting hammered by Georgia is, oh, Florida State had a bunch of guys opt out. So did Georgia. Georgia's best offensive player did not play in the game. Even if Florida State has Jordan Travis and has their best offensive weapons, their receiver, Keon Coleman. Even if Florida State has Jordan Travis and Keon Coleman weapons, and they played that exact same Georgia team, instead of 63-3, it might have been 48-17. Different, but not really. And the problem with Florida State going into the playoff, coming into the season, the whole discrepancy about the college football playoff, how did they get left out? All those questions were answered, and it becomes glaringly obvious what the actual issue was with Florida State and them missing the playoff and the rankings and all that stuff. The actual issue was they were just ranked too high to begin with. And when you come out with those initial rankings, when you have those top 5 teams and they continue to win games on a week in and week out basis, it's hard to just drop them down unless they're barely beating like FCS teams in triple overtime. That wasn't the case. Florida State was playing some decent opponents throughout the year, and ultimately they remained undefeated, played in the regular season, played in a Power 5 conference, didn't lose a game. So in the eyes of most people, well, if you're ranked 4th and you didn't lose a game, why would you drop out of the top? Why would you drop from a spot that you rightfully earned? That's not true in the case of Florida State. And as it turns out, Florida State probably should have been in the realm of 13 to 8 or 9, somewhere around 10, even as an undefeated team, based on the competition they played, how they performed against that competition, strength of schedule, all the different factors that are really hard to quantify, hard to adjust to when you're playing a sport like football and you only have 13 or 12 games to base a team's entire performance off. And I know Florida State had a bunch of guys opt out of the game against Georgia. Georgia had a lot of guys opt out too. A lot of guys opted out for Georgia. Georgia's best offensive player opted out. And Florida State, sure, potentially a shell of what they may have been. But that Florida State team you saw against Georgia wasn't a whole lot different from the Florida State team you saw in the ACC championship against Louisville. So it becomes obvious that Florida State was just simply ranked too high. That's it. It's not a big deal. It's not like Florida State's some garbage dumpster fire team and they're way overhyped. And like, they were really good. They were really, really good. But even with Jordan Travis, even with Keon Coleman, even with all those guys healthy and readily available, and an excellent defense for Florida State, realistically, 13-0, they should have been ranked probably 9, probably 10, somewhere in there throughout the range of the entire regular season. And even after they won the ACC. And it's no disrespect, because that's a really good high ranking. But you watch just any part of the New Year's 6 games, not only the game against Georgia with Florida State, but the other games in the college football playoff, and it becomes glaringly obvious that the committee got it right. Everybody was losing their marbles. Everyone was so self-righteous. When the final college football rankings came out, everybody wanted to come to Florida State's defense. How dare you? They deserved it. They're entitled to it because they're undefeated and they're a Power 5 conference champion. They're not entitled to anything. Doesn't mean that they just get in automatically. I mean, there's an argument when everyone's healthy, everyone's readily available for all these teams going into conference championship weekend. Based on what we saw from Florida State against an SEC opponent, there's an argument that Florida State should have been behind Michigan, Alabama, Washington, Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, Missouri, Ole Miss. There's an argument for that. But everybody became this self-righteous sportsmanship. Oh my gosh, Florida State, how could they possibly have been left out of the playoff? Oh my goodness, they got robbed. They deserved it. And then they played Georgia. Everyone watched the college football semifinal games, and nobody said that. They watched Florida State. Yes, a shell of themselves, but they played a Georgia team who's also a shell of themselves. They watched the Rose Bowl. They watched the Sugar Bowl, and all those self-righteous Florida State diehard defenders, crickets. Oh, yeah. Well, if Alabama beat Georgia, competed pretty well with the number one team in the country, Michigan, yeah, they're probably better than Florida State. Yeah. Washington, undefeated. Texas competes with them down to the very end. Yeah, those teams are both probably better than Florida State. Georgia, also probably better than Florida State. Yeah. Just find it funny. Just think, it's not a big deal. It's not like my goal is not to completely just hammer Florida State and just dump on them, because they were a good football team this year. They were a very good football team. Really good. Top 10, which is a huge achievement. New Year's Six Bowl worthy. No question about it. But everybody invented this, undefeated Power 5 champion, automatically you get a spot in the playoff. Not how it works. Now, 12-team playoff, Florida State, obviously they're in, right? But you want to get the bye, 4 seed, whatever, became glaringly obvious. They played Georgia. They got absolutely rinsed. Everyone watched the college football playoff. Eyes, brain, regular information processing for human beings. Florida State wasn't even close to a top 4 team. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. They were good. They were really good. They weren't top 4. Just becomes obvious. They were ranked too high to begin with. It's not a big deal. It's not Florida State's the worst team of all time. No, really good team. Not top 4. Ranked too high to begin with. Because then when they get ranked that high and they don't lose, they have to stay up there based in the eyes of these random people that vote on it. But ultimately, they were ranked probably a little too high. A shell of a team, Florida State. I get it. A lot of opt-outs. Jordan Travis is hurt. Yep, all makes sense. Totally understand. Georgia had a lot of opt-outs. Kind of a shell of themselves as well. A lot of defensive guys didn't play for Georgia because they were going in the first round. Georgia beats them 63-3, and Alabama beat Georgia, and Alabama takes Michigan to overtime. Yeah, the whole tidal wave of Florida State defenders and lifers and people that were outraged that Florida State got robbed. I don't hear any of that anymore. So next time there's a discrepancy, let's let things play out a little bit. Let's consider competition and let's consider level of play leading up to the college football playoff selection before everybody jumps on the rankings in the committee, because it turns out they got it right. Wouldn't you know? And if Florida State played Michigan in the Rose Bowl, final score 35-7, minimum 35-7. Maybe less guys opt out for Florida State. No, definitely. Florida State doesn't have the opt-outs, but they still got to roll out Tate Rodemaker. And even if they have Jordan Travis, they still lose to Michigan. And they would still have lost to Georgia. If they were healthy, just got screwed out of the 4th spot, had everyone available, Georgia still beats them pretty good. Michigan beats them. Alabama would beat them. Washington would have beat them. Texas would have beat them. It's okay to admit that a team was just ranked too high to begin with. It happened with USC. USC got ranked really, really high this year. And then they started playing against okay competition, barely beating people. Their reasons were a little bit different than Florida State. And Florida State was winning comfortably in most cases. USC was not. But USC was staying undefeated and they were dropping down in the AP rankings. every week they would come down a spot or 2 spots because they didn't look great and their competition level wasn't super high. So they would drop a little bit. They were ranked too high. They would start dropping. Florida State was ranked too high. And the only time that happened when they were in the top 4, then they dropped, was right before the last week of the regular season. They were at 4 and they dropped to 5 because the committee was like, I don't know. I don't know if these guys are that. They're not bad. They're really solid. Definitely top 7 to 10, but top 4. Then Ohio State loses and they just automatically slide up into that spot based on the fact that they won. They were the 5th seeded team. Ohio State lost. They slide to 4. But it is what it is, and it's not the end of the world for Florida State.